Hello, everybody. Welcome to our first Native Voices in STEM series. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us today in our talk series. We'd like to start with the land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples today. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui communities. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. So today we like to kick off the Native Voices in STEM seminar series that is co-sponsored by the Indigenous Resilience Center, the University of Arizona's Sloan Indigenous Graduate Partnership, the Water Resource Research Center, and the Office of Societal Impact. The seminar highlights Native scientists, engineers, educators, leaders, and social activists. It offers students an opportunity to network and learn about research and careers of Native leaders in various fields. So today we're joined by Dr. Joseph Hoover. Dr. Hoover is an environmental scientist who addresses environmental exposures and health disparities using community-engaged research methods and technologies. Sorry, Joe, you can explain that. His research emphasizes drinking water quality and accesses challenges experienced by Indigenous communities, with additional interest in community-engaged research methods and healthy homes. He employs a community-driven research approach to develop sustaining partnerships with communities, which includes project co-development and training. Dr. Hoover's larger research goal is to reduce exposure to environmental contaminants through use of analytical tools that communities can then build on for future efforts. So I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Hoover.
Thank you, Bernice, for the introduction. And thank you all for the invitation to present today as part of this series. It's very exciting for me. I will share my screen and we can get this show on the road. Could someone just confirm that you can see the slides on the screen?
Yes.
Alrighty, thank you. So I tweaked the title of my talk ever so slightly to be what you see there, addressing environmental data gaps through community engaged projects. And the way that I have structured this presentation is to give a couple of slides just sort of on the background and sort of philosophy I use when conducting projects with Indigenous peoples. And then I wanted to highlight a couple of ongoing projects, one that includes water, and then another one that actually includes solid waste disposal, because I was thinking through the lens of food, energy, water, sovereignty, security, that both of those topics would be relevant. So very briefly, just so you know who I am and kind of where I'm coming from and the perspectives that I bring. I hold a PhD in geography, so that's the geospatial technology aspect of what I do. I use a lot of geographic information systems, GIS, as well as GPS, spatial analysis and modeling in the work that I do. I have a degree from University of Arizona. I earned a master's degree here in geography back in 2009. And before that, I have a degree in environmental science. And my current affiliations are with the Environmental Science Department at U of A, and I'm also affiliated with the Indigenous Resilience Center, which I'm grateful for that opportunity and the privileges that come along with that. In my broader work, one of the other key roles I just want to highlight because it's relevant for one of the projects I want to talk about, I'm co-director for a National Institutes of Health funded center titled the Center for Native Environmental Health Equity Research. And I will briefly talk about that center towards the end of the presentation. And then here's a picture of me putting a GPS collar on a sheep in one of the communities where we've been running a project there for a few years. So to sort of ground you in the approaches and activities that I'm going to describe in the rest of the presentation, I just wanted to highlight a couple of things. And some of this was just my own reflections on how I approach the work that I do. My work, I really do strive to to subscribe to community engaged practices, community engaged research, community-based participatory research, depending on what term you want to use. And I really make efforts to meet communities and community leadership where they are and find opportunities to leverage the tools and expertise that I've developed over my academic career to address the needs that community members and leaders are articulating that they want some support with. And this includes elements of Indigenous data sovereignty, as well as deep respect for adhering to tribal research approval and dissemination processes, which all vary by community, and really taking the time to develop those relationships and to make sure that I am acting in a way that is appropriate for the communities and the individuals that I'm interacting with. And so that is some experience, some mentored experiences that I've had through the various projects that I've been involved with, as well as direct experiences interacting with tribal institutional review boards and other entities. So I want to acknowledge that I'm grateful for the opportunity and the privilege to work with the communities that I work with on issues of environmental justice, environmental health, and lots of other things. So to further refine this a little bit and just give you a visual example of the ways that, one of the ways in which I sort of have worked to develop and implement projects. This is a figure from a project that I've been co-leading with Dr. Sheldon Yazzie at the Albuquerque Area Southwest Tribal Epidemiology Center in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I really liked the figure that we put together because I think it does a nice job of representing it for our particular project here, the Healthy Homes Project, but my work more generally, the ways in which I try to center upon Indigenous knowledges and perspectives and values. And so a lot of the beginnings of the project and really throughout the project is focused on building and maintaining relationships. And we do this in a collaborative, open manner in which agency is respected and autonomy is supported. We design projects, be it the way that we approach individuals, the community leaders that we talk with, the way that we implement the project is really intended to respect and honor Indigenous knowledges through the planning, design, as well as the implementation stage. And reciprocity is also an important component of that, because we really design our projects to make sure that it's not me in the field doing the work necessarily, but it's facilitating and supporting what the community values and needs really are. And so oftentimes community members are themselves trained to do the field work and to do the interpretation and dissemination and are involved in the process throughout. And then lastly, we strive to implement projects in a responsible way. And we do this through various forms of evaluation with an eye towards sustainability, because the last thing that we really want is for these one-off projects to be one-offs. We want them to be the foundation for ongoing projects that communities can really take on, building upon the efforts and tools that we're able to co-develop together through, say, an initially funded project. And then it's cyclical, and there's lots of outreach, communication, and engagement with various levels of leadership. And so while I'm not going to talk about the Healthy Homes Project specifically, I do think that this diagram illustrates some of the core elements of the principles that I bring when I'm designing, implementing, and co-running projects with various partners. So much of my work is really motivated by the presence of abandoned mines. And a lot of the work that I've done is with Indigenous peoples in the Western United States. There are various pictures on this slide illustrating different examples of mining impact areas. A lot of the work that I have had the privilege of doing is with members of the Navajo Nation, looking at issues related to abandoned uranium mines. And that is one of the water projects that I'll talk about here in a bit. But what I want to emphasize is that I've had the opportunity to do this work really since about 2014, when I joined the Community Environmental Health Program at the University of New Mexico, which provided a lot of direct mentorship in how to design and implement projects in partnership with community leadership. And so a lot of the experiences that I've had have been facilitated by CEHP and some of the relationships that have been built out from that partnership. Early on, when I joined the University of New Mexico team in 2014, 2015, we started working with geospatial data, and we're really interested in questions around where are abandoned mines located and what are some of the associated environmental and health questions that derive from the presence of these mines. And one of the things that we recognize is that there's not a lot of great information available about where abandoned hard rock mines are located in the Western United States. The map here in the middle of the slide is our attempt to visualize, at the time, this would be about 2016 when we made this image, based on best available information, where the highest density of abandoned mines are likely located. And one of the things that we recognized is that, one, there are abandoned mines all over the Western United States, or in various locations across the Western United States. And a lot of these mines are located on or proximal to reservations and really populate the historical areas where various communities and tribes historically accessed resources. And what we found is that gold, uranium, vanadium, copper, and lead were some of the most common abandoned mines that were located in the Western US. And then around this time, the Gold King mine spill happened in Southwest Colorado. There's a picture of the Animas River. You can see it turned the river that vibrant gold color, presence of manganese and iron and other metals that were in this water. And it just, at the time, it really served the purpose of as a stark reminder about the lasting long-term impacts that these abandoned mines continue to have on communities. And so a lot of the issues that sort of arose from the Gold King mine spill in terms of exposure, potential health implications, effects on livestock, agriculture, really continue to be motivators for the kinds of work that I do. So within the context of abandoned mines, this diagram sort of serves as a way to conceptualize the various, I guess, segments that my line of research and more broadly the collaborations that I've had the privilege of developing emphasize. And so there's a lot of work, and this is not so much the work that I do, but a lot of my collaborators have worked to understand the characteristics and composition of metals and other chemicals that are found in mine waste. And then we look at the various routes and pathways by which that waste moves through the environment, ultimately making its way to people. And so a lot of my work has emphasized water. I've done some livestock work, as evidenced by the picture during the brief intro that I provided. And then more recently, I'm doing a lot more work that involves air as pathways by which it gets to people. And then through my work with the University of New Mexico, I've also been involved with the Navajo birth cohort study and subsequent iterations of that cohort that have really investigated how uranium exposure early in life stages affects child neurodevelopment and other outcomes. And so I've really had it's really been a privilege for me to work with the individuals that I've worked with and the communities that I've worked with, because it's given me a very broad perspective on how we can use geospatial technology and community engaged practices to develop questions and generate answers or information that can be very useful for community partners and Indigenous peoples more broadly. So what I would like to do is transition just a little bit to talk about a couple of specific projects using this particular framework. And what I want to first start with are some issues that I've been working on related to water. And so the lens through which I will talk about the water work is really grounded in this notion of household water insecurity, and really the fact that there are millions of people in the US and many more millions across the globe that lack reliable and ready access to safe drinking water, or water for other purposes like other domestic applications, agriculture, and more. And because a lot of my work is motivated by public health oriented questions about how things, materials, chemicals that are found in water can affect people's health, a lot of the literature that I've used to contextualize and justify the work that I'm doing comes from that public health literature. And with the work that I've done with communities in the Navajo Nation, there are lots of questions around the quality for unregulated water sources. Unregulated water sources being water sources that provide water for maybe domestic applications, potentially drinking water, that don't meet the definition of a public water supply as detailed by the US EPA through the Safe Drinking Water Act. And when getting water from an unregulated water source, there really is no central entity that is responsible for testing the quality of that water, evaluating how that water quality changes over time, let alone looking at specific types of contaminants like trace metals, microbials, emerging contaminants, And then there's also emerging questions around how climate change and changes in groundwater levels are also affecting what is found in that water. And so these are some of the factors that motivate the kinds of work that I do. The example, there's some pictures on the right-hand side of the slide that illustrate an unregulated water source on the top and then more of a regulated water hauling location on the bottom. But ultimately, this work is about better information that can be used in decision-making processes to address this longstanding challenge of drinking water provision for people across this country. And so when I started at UNM, one of the first projects that I undertook was really to consolidate as much water quality information as we could find about unregulated water sources within the boundaries of or proximal to Navajo Nation. And while I won't get into the nitty-gritty of what that process looked like, this map here serves to illustrate just the variety of entities that over time have been involved in collection of water samples and analysis of these unregulated sources in this area. So you have a map of the Navajo Nation. On this slide, you have an inset on the top right, if you don't know where Navajo Nation is in the Southwest US. And each one of these icons is intentionally placed on the map to illustrate approximate areas of sampling. And what you'll notice, or what I noticed when I put this map together, is one, there's a lot of logos on this map. Two, the logos are located sometimes coincidentally with each other, but oftentimes they're located in distinct areas that don't necessarily overlap. And so the sort of recognition here was that when we have these individual studies, we get a very narrow perspective on the quality and potential safety of these unregulated sources in specific areas. And we really needed a compilation to pull together this information so that we could better ascertain and understand the larger trends that are occurring within groundwater sources across the nation rather than these very isolated studies. And so we spent some time doing some harmonization and standardization, ultimately creating a database that houses more than 2,000 water sources with some water quality information associated with them. And there's certainly variety in the types of water quality information that were generated, be it trace metals, radionuclides, microbial, one sample, repeated samples over time. But importantly, we put this into a database and we made that database information and all of the publicly available information accessible through a data archive. And that's what this slide is intending to represent. And this was work that Daniel Bean was instrumental in. He's a doctoral candidate at the University of New Mexico. And so we took this database that I had initially sort of started compiling, and we turned it into a resource that people could access online through this data repository, the Environmental Data Initiative. And so this data set that we created has a persistent DOI. It's illustrated on the slide here. So you could click on that if this were interactive, and you could go download this information yourself, and you could look and see what particular information is available for any individual water sources. Well, we recognize that making this information findable and accessible to a certain segment of the population is useful. This tool in and of itself only gets us so far. And so, and again, Daniel was instrumental in this, but we took that database and we made a public version of it that really uses interactive geospatial technology disseminated through the internet so that people could access it and engage with the data a little bit. Now, I acknowledge that this particular tool really is useful for graduate students, researchers, maybe somebody at an environmental protection agency. It's not necessarily intended for the water user who's out hauling water that maybe doesn't have some scientific background to help interpret some of the information here. But it was really one of our first attempts to democratize this data in some way and really just to advertise that these data are available. Individually, each one of these data sets, for the most part, is public information and is accessible, but it's kind of a lot of work to pull it all together and to harmonize it so we can actually visualize it and analyze it all at the same time. And it gives very different perspectives when we look at these larger regional trends rather than what's happening at an individual well. And so this tool is available. Daniel is continuing to update and improve the tool. He's going to start doing some usability testing this fall as part of his dissertation. And I'm very excited and privileged to be part of that process that he is leading. One of the other things that we recognized from this visualization work, and when we started getting questions from community leaders and even some residents who wanted to use the tool, is there's lots of gaps. Places on this map where we don't have water quality information. So each one of these dots on the map illustrates a water source that has been tested, and we have that water quality information available in our compilation. But we know that there are many more water sources that are that are in these areas that we just don't have information for. And so we started reaching out as a team. We started reaching out to individual communities to see if they would have interest in working with us to do some water quality analysis to better understand the water resources in their individual areas. And so this was supported by a small grant or a pilot grant from the Indigenous Resilience Center. Thank you, IRES. It enabled us to develop some new relationships with some community partners that we hadn't worked with before, and working through the process of getting community support, writing a resolution, presenting the resolution, responding to questions, updating the resolution, and ultimately gaining support from one chapter in particular to do this work. And we've since gone out and started water sampling in this community where we had no previously available information. And the community itself had indicated that there really wasn't much knowledge about sort of the chemical characteristics of the water that were very important for many families, either for hauling, for domestic purposes, or for livestock. And so the picture on this slide is from a recent sampling trip that we took. We sampled this particular well, and we're in the process of compiling those results. And we will head back to the chapter, hopefully in the next couple of months, to talk with individual livestock owners, as well as to report back to the chapter and discuss what some next steps might be. And so this compilation has in some ways taken us in unexpected directions because it's really highlighted gaps in our knowledge base, which is really important when we start thinking about climate adaptation, resilience, because if you don't have basic information about some of the resources that you're using, it really can limit the impact of some of the decisions that a community needs to be making and is already making in response to changes in groundwater levels, water availability, things like that. So we're very happy that the project has sort of gone in this direction, and we've been able to develop some new relationships, and we'll see where it goes, and we'll keep working with that. One of the other things that sort of has emerged from this work, taking a step back from the water quality, the more physical characteristics and the chemistry, is looking at sort of the orientation of the ways in which people have approached and discussed water access with communities in Navajo Nation. And this sort of this question here emerged from some conversations that we've been having with Indian Health Service and the Navajo Nation Water Access Coordination Group during the pandemic, and really asking questions about what information do we know in regards to water access in Navajo communities. And as we started digging into the studies that had been done previously and looking at survey items and really digging into the kinds of questions that people had been asking, what we recognized pretty quickly is that the majority of the past studies that talk about water from a drinking water perspective in Navajo Nation really have emphasized infrastructure related questions. So pipes in the ground, pipes to someone's home. But from the household water insecurity literature, we recognize that there are many other dimensions to the water experience. It's not just about having a pipe to deliver water to your house, but there are many other factors, including affordability, availability, reliability, questions around safety, be it perceptions or more chemistry-based measures from like analytical chemistry or presence of microbial organisms in water. And then there are lots of different uses. And a lot of the previous literature had really focused on this drinking water component, or it was focused on just a really general, non-specific use of water without any particular intended application. And water, when we think about our individual water experiences, I invite you to think about that. What are the ways in which you interact with water? We use water for cooking. There are cultural purposes and applications and ways that we interact with water or inspired by water. We of course use it for drinking. It's useful for sanitation and plumbing, washing. There's a wide range. There's a continuum of ways in which we interact with water, and our water experience is more nuanced than pipes to the house. And so when we start thinking about and talking about drinking water access in Navajo Nation or other Indigenous communities, or just in general, there's a lot of nuance, I think, and opportunity in that space to really refine not only our knowledge of how this interaction unfolds, but ways in which we can use these different dimensions to really inform what our next steps will be in improving that relationship with water, and really making sure that water at a quality sufficient for the intended use is available. So that kind of concludes those are my concluding thoughts on sort of that first topic, which is related to water. And just to sort of switch gears a little bit to give you a different perspective on some of the other work that I've been doing, we're now going to talk about some work that pertains to air quality. And all of this, again, is motivated by these questions about the presence of abandoned mines in and around communities where Indigenous peoples reside. And this is work that really has been facilitated by funding from the National Institutes of Health through the Center for Native Environmental Health Equity Research, which is based at the University of New Mexico, but it has lots of partners, academic partners, as well as community partners. And part of the reason I've enjoyed working with the Native EH Equity Center since it was first funded in 2015 is because we've developed and maintained relationships with Indigenous peoples in 3 different nations in the Southwest as well as the Upper Great Plains. And part of the reason that this particular group came together of communities and academic partners was because we recognize that even though there are important and significant differences in unique characteristics and situations within each nation, there are a lot of commonalities as well. And in the environmental health literature, there's fewer studies have focused on the needs of Indigenous or other peoples. And so by pulling together the group that we have created as part of this center, we're able to answer questions maybe in a slightly different way than previous studies had allowed us to do. And it's through those relationships that we, of course, came to recognize that while abandoned mines are an important source and are, depending on the community, rather prominent in terms of motivating concerns around health and environment and exposure and the ways in which people interact with their local environment and how that can affect them, there are other concerns as well. And solid waste disposal is one of those common concerns that we found amongst our community partners. And so this picture here is intended to represent an unregulated dump site in one of the communities where we have been working, well, probably since at least 2015, but earlier than that. And you can see if you were to study this image, there's a wide range of materials. Some of them are natural materials like wood or fibers. There's lots of plastics, there's metals, there's appliances, there's rubber, there's all sorts of stuff that's here. And importantly, a lot of these materials are burned, not all of them, but some of them. And when you burn at low temperature combustion, it generates that really thick, acrid smoke, and there's all sorts of stuff that's in that smoke. And one of the questions that we were receiving from multiple partners was, what's in that smoke? And it turns out there weren't as many studies at the time that we wrote the proposal that had investigated that question. And so our goal for the Native EH Equity Center sort of still included abandoned mines and metals exposure in ways that can affect health, but also sort of pivoting and adding to our set of inquiries how exposure to smoke from and other chemicals from these unregulated dump sites can affect health. And so as we started talking with our partners more and more about this and doing site visits and basically just cataloging kind of what we were seeing, we really quickly came to recognize that this is a common issue, and the particulars vary community by community, but it is a consistent challenge. Solid waste disposal outside of most urban areas is intermittent at best, and it requires a lot of infrastructure and support to make it happen. And oftentimes in less urbanized areas, that infrastructure just isn't in place. And so one of the ways that people dispose of those materials and is either through burning or just dumping in a particular location. And scenes like what are illustrated on this slide just go to show that sometimes that dumping can result in very visible and tangible impacts to health. And so if you have, even if you don't have, asthma or some sort of respiratory condition, breathing in that thick black smoke that can settle in valleys along rivers, linger in your home. The smell attaches itself to clothing and materials in your house. It's hard to escape it. And a lot of times the smoke has chemicals in it that are not necessarily good for your health or are known to be bad for your health, can cause respiratory problems, changes in your immune system, other things. It's really an important issue to address. And the solution for this type of situation can be pretty well defined. It's the implementation that really becomes challenging in finding resources, but it's really about solid waste disposal and putting materials into a sanitary landfill or sort of a centralized location where they can be disposed of in a different way. But that solution is oftentimes unattainable or very difficult to reach because it requires resources to make that happen. And so that's sort of the space in which we've been operating for the last couple of years with our partners, with our community-based team members, is really exploring what's in this smoke, and how can we basically take the information that we're generating through these research practices and provide it in a way that is actionable, and specific enough for policymakers as they deliberate and decide and discuss on how to address these issues. These are the purpose of this slide is to illustrate the particular tool that we are using to measure, to identify, I guess I should say, some of the chemicals that are present in the air. And these are bands from a company called MyExposome. Their lab is based in Oregon. Several of the researchers have affiliations with the Oregon State Superfund Research Center. And these bands are really, they're non-targeted, so they're very general. And the way that we use them is we attach them to poles or trees or other stationary objects in and around some of these locations where burning happens. And we let the bands sit outside for a week. And during that time period, the bands essentially act like a sponge. They absorb the chemicals that come into contact with it. And then we send the band off to the lab, and the lab analyzes the chemicals that are present in those bands, and they send us a report. And then we can look at the classes of chemicals and the particular chemicals that are identified, and we can start thinking about potential sources. Certain chemicals come from the combustion of organic material like wood or grasses. Other chemicals are associated with plastics, and we can dive into it. And there's lots of different ways to go with it, but that's kind of where we're at. We've been working with community-based team members to put these bands out. We have lab results. Now we're in the process of interpreting that and really focusing on how do we talk about these results, which can be sometimes complex, but oftentimes they're vague, because these bands can measure up to 1,500 different chemicals, individual chemicals. Not to say that all of those chemicals are always present, but there's a lot of information that can be generated through the use of this particular tool. And so when we go to policymakers, when we do report back in community meetings, we have to be very specific and particular about how we talk about the results, to not overgeneralize, not sensationalize, but be truthful and meaningful with what the results are and what some of the potential implications of those findings might be. And so that is something that is underway. We're in the process of doing that. We've presented results at several community meetings over the last 6 months or so. And so we're really refining our approach. But things like infographics, things like artwork, one-page handouts are really useful in conveying that information, because oftentimes people want to, some people can attend the meeting, others can't. And so they want to go talk to their relatives. I think I'm going to move through these next couple slides a little bit more rapidly. It's just pictures to sort of illustrate the scope of the problem. The center and the investigators have spent a lot of time and resources working with students, doing community trainings, collecting samples, working with tribal community colleges and universities to implement some of this work and to do some of the analysis. Some of it's rather specialized and has to be sent off to labs like MyExposome, but others can be done on site. And that's been a really meaningful experience because it's providing students opportunities to get involved with this. And a lot of times it's sampling in and around their home community, places that they know very well, and using the scientific training that they're getting through their degrees or their coursework and coupling it with some field experiences. And really it's an opportunity for relationship building. And I think that's been that's been the most meaningful aspect of a lot of this field work for some of our team members, is just the new relationships that have grown out of that and seeing the new directions that projects can go, as well as the individuals who can be involved with that. So with these pictures, you're seeing various types of plastic waste in and around one of these dump sites. You can see the plastic is embedded in roots of growing plants. And so we have some fundamental basic science questions about really the generation of things like microplastics and chemicals that are bound to those microplastics and where those microplastics go within the environment. So there's lots of, and that's the beauty of collaboration, is we can work with individuals who have expertise in trace metals and plastics and plants and soils and water, and really start to move in the direction of a more holistic assessment, at least from sort of an environmental science perspective on what we're doing. And what I just want to emphasize is that community members, community-based team members and partners are involved from day one with these projects in terms of study design, site identification, the sampling, the interpretation, the report back. It's very much a collaborative process. Last thing I want to highlight, and this was something that we presented at a community meeting this spring, and this is artwork. And I had the artwork is like poster size, and so I had to break it up into two images to present it on the slide so that it's visible. So this is the top portion, and there's the bottom portion that have the roots. But this is some artwork that was created by a student at the University of New Mexico, and it's intended to really use artwork as a way to present the scientific principles that guide the way that the research is done, but really to indicate the importance using imagery and colors and symbology that is much more appropriate for the communities where we are working. Not so much about box plots and bar graphs and things like that, but a different approach. And so the top portion of the image here on the left, you see a plastic bag, a plastic water bottle, a CD, wrappers and things like that. And as you move down towards the right, the larger bits of plastic are turning into smaller bits of plastic. And this is representing erosional processes, be it UV degradation from solar, incoming solar radiation, physical erosion, but basically breaking those plastic particles down, and those plastic particles are moving into the soil. And we have some plants that are growing out of that soil. And this is the bottom portion of that image. And you can see that the plants with their stems and the roots in the soil. And you can see that the small plastic particles are just moving down through the soil, which is what we observe with our field studies. And those plastic particles get smaller and smaller because they're eroding and degrading more and more. And they get small enough where they can actually be taken up into the plant roots themselves. And where they go within the plant roots is somewhat of an open question, but they can move into the roots, and then they can translocate within the plant itself as the plant is moving nutrients and water and other things around. And so some of the basic science questions that we have are around where do those microplastics go, what chemicals are attached to those microplastics. But more broadly, it's how does the presence of plastics and other chemicals in the soil affect plants, and how does it affect the utility and usability of those plants for sustenance, for traditional or cultural practices, or agriculture, things that people are doing for economic livelihood. So it's a very it gets in depth pretty quickly, and it's rarely as simple as, oh, we're going to go measure the microplastics in the soil. There's a lot more context that goes along with that. And the beauty of the collaboration is that we have at this point built up and are maintaining those relationships where we can have some of these conversations across our team, where we can get a variety of perspectives on the way to design and implement and interpret the data that are generated, and think about next steps that are really intended to answer, again, community questions using the available science tools and technology and methods that a lot of our team members have been trained in. So I think that is my last slide. I don't really have a great summary slide other than to say I hope that through this presentation you've gained some insight into the way that I view and have implemented community engaged research with the Indigenous peoples that I've had the privilege of working. And I do want to acknowledge the many research partners and funding entities and communities that I've had the privilege of working with over the last decade to do this type of work and more. So with that, I will stop talking and stop sharing and turn it back over to the team, and we can have some Q&A or see where people want to go with this. So thank you for your attention and for joining today. I appreciate it.